In recent years, the African startup ecosystem has experienced a notable surge in venture funding, signaling a promising era for innovation on the continent. With a growing pool of young, dynamic entrepreneurs and a growing tech scene, Africa has now become an attractive destination for global investors seeking untapped opportunities. However, challenges persist, including a relative lack of early-stage funding and regulatory hurdles. But despite these obstacles, the momentum is undeniable, and Africa's vibrant startup ecosystem is poised to make significant strides in the global tech arena. Ray Sharma, lead partner at VC fund firm Pacer Ventures, talks more about this. Thank you so much, Ray Sharma, lead partner at Pacer Ventures, for joining us on Tech Trends today.
Thank you for having me.
Now, tell me, Ray, you've been involved in venture funding for startups, including those in Africa. What do you see as the unique opportunities for African startups in the tech space?
Yeah, it's true. I've funded a couple of hundred startups so far in my career, but I'll give you an answer that's the typical answer and then something that I find that's really unique. The typical answer is relates to demographics, the youthful population, the births that are happening on the continent and in the country, the migration from the rural area to the cities, and the resulting productivity impact. These things are all very positive. But some of the less obvious things are, for example, one of the implications of COVID was an explosion of education technology companies. And I have a thesis that there's very few places in the world that'll benefit more from the changes in EdTech than the continent and Nigeria itself. In addition, something profound happened earlier this year with the release of ChatGPT. ChatGPT also resulted in a whole new generation of software development. This has leveled the playing field globally, and with this youthful population that we think is exceptionally talented, there's an opportunity for Nigeria to leapfrog and join the world stage when it comes to software development. It's one of those situations where having 20 years development experience doesn't really help you now. You're going to have a whole new paradigm of software development, and we're hopeful that we can lead the way starting in Lagos.
Now, Ray, if I am correct, this is like your, fourth or fifth time in Nigeria, right?
Yeah, I've been here many times.
Yeah, so as an international investor, what key factors do you look out for in startups here and in Africa? What key factors do you look out when you're looking to invest?
Before we settled on this region, I explored the world. I went to South America, Colombia in particular, Europe, US, because we had a model in Toronto that had worked really well. But what I found that was particularly interesting here is this is where need intersected with opportunity. There's another important factor, which is Nigeria really sets the trend, not just for the continent, but for the diaspora. It's more than just the large population. It's the Afrobeats, it's the fashion, it's the food, and I spent some time studying cultural things like Nollywood. And importantly, what I did is I surrounded myself with partners, local partners, who are exceptional. So this is, although I'm here talking today, I think one message I want to leave with you and everyone, which is this is a Nigerian effort led by Nigerians for Nigerians. And the hope is, just like the continent tends to copy Nigeria in so many different ways, the hope is that if you can make it in Lagos, you can make it anywhere.
True, and Nigerians are always proud to be pace setters anywhere they go. But would you say that the ongoing AI revolution has had an impact on your investment decisions?
Absolutely. There's a new investment we're about to bring to the continent. It's a AI tutor. It's actually a gentleman out of London who's developed the technology. Imagine a student anywhere in the country who points the AI to a particular textbook. The textbook gets ingested by the AI, and through WhatsApp or your feature phone, you're able to ask questions to the AI tutor about that textbook. One of the things that we learned about Nigeria and the continent is the student-to-teacher ratio is relatively high when you compare it to the West. Now imagine a one-to-one experience where you can talk to a tutor anytime you want, and we think this should be really beneficial here.
Fantastic. We'll see how that goes. I'll be on the lookout for it. But tell me, Ray, what advice do you have for aspiring African tech entrepreneurs that are seeking venture funding? Like, what should they focus on?
It's an excellent question. It's the two primary things, and this is again oversimplifying, but the two primary things we look at is the entrepreneur's understanding of their serviceable, addressable market opportunity, what we call SAM. And their ability to analyze and understand their market pricing-wise, what we call in the West unit economics, which is to understand the profitability of your customer by every which way, whether it be by demographic or geography. And then the second thing we look at is the entrepreneurs themselves. Oftentimes, especially at this early stage of investing, I'd say 95% plus of the time, the business that they end up doing is dramatically different than the business they present to us. And so what's happening between the beginning and that end conclusion is a lot of pivoting, a lot of direction into areas that they weren't expecting. So the entrepreneur needs to have the right ego so that when the time comes where their customers, say, for example, pull them in a different direction, that they're able to make the adjustments as necessary. It's a dynamicism, yes, but it's also having the right personality to not be overly fixated on their vision, and having a vision that is dynamic and able to evolve.
And how do you think that African governments can come in this, to help support the startups?
I have a bit of a different view when it comes to governments, because we all tend to really, we love to blame the government for our problems. It's not just a Nigerian thing, it's a global thing. If you look back at Canada, there's a disproportionate amount of time spent about complaining about the government. It's everywhere. It's in the restaurants, it's in the boardrooms. For me, I look at the role of government as just helping us not get in trouble, but generally not getting in the way too much, because the nature of entrepreneurship is almost like a random mutation in business. And so the government's role, where they can be helpful, is just making sure we don't do improper things, make sure we don't get ourselves into trouble through things like regulations. But generally speaking, I would prefer not to be dependent on government. I would rather be dependent on the fundamentals, which is the entrepreneurs and the customers. So if we can service the customers well and the customers appreciate it, the government shouldn't matter too much. No disrespect to the government, but like I said, I see the role of government differently. Not necessarily, we need them to be successful. We just need them so that we don't do improper things.
Okay, so now looking at the numbers, when we talk about venture funding or funding in general for African tech startups, what should we expect in the future?
So the continent is almost about the same size as Canada when it comes to venture capital. That's not a compliment, because Canada has 40 million people and the continent is around 1.5 billion or so, depending on the estimate you look at. So you could look at it negatively and say the environment is, or the market is quite small. I mentioned the 4 countries that are head and shoulders above the rest. When you look at those, it's Nigeria, the 3, and then it really drops off. But I look at it very optimistically. I look at this glass half full, because what I see 10, 20, 30 years of growth dramatically outpacing the rest of the world. And just inevitably through, the fullness of time, Africa will rise and then take its rightful place in the world stage. See, to me, and I looked at this objectively, like I said earlier, I looked at all the different areas around the world, including where I'm born in India. And it would have been much more natural for me to focus on India. But I think for me, and I can lay out the thesis, but I think I already have, it's not a question of is Africa, or it's a continent, the next frontier. To me, there's no doubt it is the next and last frontier. So there's a lot of really exciting things to look forward to in terms of the country and the continent.
Mm-hmm. So just before we close this interview, Ray, as a venture capitalist with a global perspective, what excites you the most about the potential of the tech space in Africa?
So one thing about entrepreneurship and the tech space in general is that we love having stories, just like I think anywhere. We love to have stories to look up to. So when Zuckerberg came out with Facebook, you would have noticed just hundreds of social networking companies spawn in inspiration of that particular startup. And this is a tried and tested thing, throughout the world and throughout the sectors and throughout the cycles. So what I'm really looking forward to is the examples that can be used so that the future generations, this tremendously youthful population, has examples to look up forward to aspire to, and to emulate. And then that should create this thing we call cradle to grave, which is an endless cycle of entrepreneurs becoming successful, and then they help the next generation of entrepreneurs. When I go around giving speeches and talking to people, I do try to leave this, and I'll leave this as the final point too, which is I would hope that when people do achieve their own success, that they look for ways to pay it forward. And there's no better ways that a successful entrepreneur can pay it forward than to become an angel investor and start investing in other entrepreneurs around them. So that's something that I would hope is something that can provide almost a flywheel, which is a self-feeding cycle, which will ultimately lead to accelerated evolution.
Well, I also hope that, that comes to, fruition soon. Thank you so much, Ray Sharma, lead partner at Pacer Ventures, for joining us on Tech Trends.
Thanks again.